slavery is no longer legal anywhere in the world, but human trafficking still occurs in every country. Here's a brief history of human trafficking, including a timeline of events in the United States and internationally that have shaped our understanding of human trafficking and the fight against it. It occurs in every corner of the world, and thanks to the internet, the issue is no longer contained by physical boundaries. The timeline of human trafficking is long. For as long as humans have existed, human trafficking has existed. Human trafficking is commonly referred to as modern-day slavery. While the words slavery and human trafficking are frequently used interchangeably, slavery has a more general definition. Merriam-Webster.com defines slavery simply as the state of a person who is held in forced servitude. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, defines human trafficking as the act of gathering, moving, receiving, or keeping human beings by threat, force, coercion, or deception, for exploitative purposes. For much of human history, across cultures and continents, slavery was legal, regulated, and common. It was often perpetrated by one people group onto another. However, in the 19th and 20th centuries, an international movement began to abolish slavery in all its forms. Our understanding of and fight against human trafficking have grown out of these movements. 1500 to 1866, transatlantic slave trade. During the 16th century, Portugal began traveling overseas to Africa to purchase or capture people, enslave them, and take them back to Europe. Other European nations followed. 1525 marked the first slave voyage from Africa to the Americas. Over the next roughly 350 years, during a period known as the transatlantic slave trade, some 12.5 million slaves were shipped from Africa around the world. 10.7 million arrived in the Americas, including the Caribbean, South America, and North America. Between 300,000 and 400,000 enslaved Africans arrived in North America. During the 16th century, owning African slaves was a legal and governmentally condoned practice. It wasn't until 1807 that Britain first outlawed slavery. The United States followed in 1820, nearly 40 years before the American Civil War. Despite the laws outlawing slavery, the last reported transatlantic slave voyage arrived in the Americas in 1866. 1850 to 1900, the traffic of Chinese women into the United States. The Chinese began arriving in the United States in significant numbers in the mid-1800s. They were drawn to the United States by the promise of lucrative jobs associated with the California Gold Rush and the construction of the Central Pacific Railroad. As the number of Chinese immigrants grew, they became the targets of racial hatred and violence because of the perceived economic threat. At the same time, concerns spread over the practice of coolie labor. At the end of the transatlantic slave trade, many countries around the Americas began contracting coolie labor from China as a source of low-wage workers. However, many critics said that this practice was simply a new form of slavery, sometimes using coercion, deceit, and violence. Thus, by the early 1880s, males made up 95% of the Chinese population in the U.S. This spurred the illegal traffic of Chinese women into California and the American West by Chinese gangs called Tongs. Most of the Chinese women who crossed the Pacific in the mid-1880s were enslaved, and many of them were forced into prostitution by these gangs. The trafficking of Chinese women into the United States continued and flourished into the early 1900s. 1900 to 1910, the International Agreement for the Suppression of White Slave Traffic. Following the abolition of the African slave trade, white slavery became a topic of interest for many international governments as people became aware of European women, often immigrants, ensnared in forced prostitution. White slavery was defined as the procurement, by use of force, deceit, or drugs, of a white woman or girl against her will for prostitution. With the advent of the internet, the world of human trafficking radically changed. It's no longer necessary to move exploited individuals to a specific physical location. Now, thanks to video streaming, a victim can remain in one location and be exploited all over the world. Along with actual digital product distribution, social media is also used in the grooming and recruitment of trafficking victims and in the advertising and sales of sexual services.
Wazi, miaka 14. Tunasomba michanga. Niko kilo sana na fasi tukapeleka ni mbali. Tualamuka na 4h30. Tunamaliza na 8h juste. Tunaanza na 16h, tunamaliza na 19h.